And we're back for another segment of Good Vibes. I'm Martin False, joined by our transformation coach, Debbie Cox-Danova. She comes each week bringing us some good information, and today's topic is fantastic because, Debbie, first of all, welcome.
Thank you.
We can go back to our early childhood days when mom and dad knew we were lying.
Yes.
I don't know how they could tell, but they figured a way to tell. So I guess they had the experience, and I guess once you see your children and they develop patterns, you could pick it out pretty good. But today's topic, detecting lies.
Detecting lies.
It's a great topic.
Thank you.
Can't wait to hear this.
Okay, so this information comes from Pamela Meyer, who wrote a book called Lie Spotters. And she talks about a deception epidemic. In fact, it has been shown by researchers that it starts at about 6 months old. So you know how the baby cries, does the fake cry, and then stops and looks to see if someone's coming and then continues crying. And then by the age of 1, we're concealing things. By the age of 2, we're bluffing. By the age of 9, we've gotten really good at covering things up. And by the time we're an adult, we actually get really good at lying to ourselves. On average, we're hearing about 10 to 200 lies per day. And researchers have shown that in a 10-minute conversation with a stranger, we tell about 3 lies and we don't even know that we're doing it. So the problem is that when you're dealing with people who lie on a regular basis or who have pathological tendencies around lying, they're really bad for structured societies, right? So it becomes really, really important. And all throughout history, they've developed many ways to try to get people to tell the truth. They have woven it into the religious systems and also the government systems, punishments. There's been medieval torture methods, encephalographs, many different ways to tell whether or not people are lying. But the very best way in the modern world is to look at the science of deception and the way that the brain works and pick up on the tells. Now, before I tell you all of this, I want to make sure that everyone at home knows and understands that we're going to talk about some red flags, but these are not proof that someone is lying. Right. However, when we talk about the number of things that we're looking for, it's all about looking for clusters, right? So there becomes these discrediting factors when you lump them all together, and there are many, more and more and more, those are red flags, and then you can sort of protect yourself from potential lies. So to begin with, first of all, let me just say this because this is a funny story. It's not just humans, okay? The bigger the neocortex, it seems, the more prone we are to deception. And I don't know if you remember Coco the gorilla in the 70s.
Remember Coco well. Watched the whole thing on Coco.
Everybody knows Coco. They taught him sign language so that he could communicate to humans. And Coco had a little pet kitten. Coco actually once blamed that kitten for ripping a sink out of the wall of his space, okay? So it's not just humans who are deceiving. We do this because we are trying to create a bridge between the person we want to be and the person we actually are in real life.
But Coco wasn't smart enough to realize that a cat or a kitten could not rip a sink out of a wall.
No, but you know what's interesting is that it's been shown that pathological liars actually have a different brain structure. Because in order to be a really good liar, a pathological liar actually in the time of speaking the lie almost has to believe their own lie. So the more that you can actually convince yourself that you're telling the truth, the less tells there are, right? But that creates a different brain structure. So what they found, and there's a lot of neuroscience around gray matter, you know about that. That's all the processing that goes on in the brain. But then there's also the white matter. So the white matter is responsible for connectivity in the brain. And so a pathological liar has a greater than average ability to keep track of the things that they have said in the past that are lies and actually play down the tells, right? And watch and monitor the person that they're telling the lie to be sure that their lie is hitting home. So they actually have about 25% more white matter in the brain. However, you might think, well, then they could just rule society, right? I mean, they're obviously learning how to communicate in a way that tips the scales in their favor. But as it turns out, they actually have 14% less gray matter where the critical thinking happens. So what happens for a lot of people who are prone to lying is that they don't make the evaluative choices to know that if I say this thing, if I pretend I was a fighter pilot or whatnot, it might actually damage these relationships with people. And so over a very short period of time, people start to learn that this person is deceptive, and they end up losing relationships and jobs, and they have a hard time in society.
I've done news stories over the years, and I see this on TV all the time when I'm looking at big story. And they'll ask someone, just give an example. Did you rob that bank? I absolutely and unequivocally
Yes.
did not rob that bank. And I'm going, yes or a no would have done well.
That's exactly right. And you know what's interesting is what you said. That's actually a tell, right? So when someone says absolutely or to be perfectly honest, right, then that actually damages when you're talking about people who are trained at looking for lies.
Can I be honest with you?
Yes, can I be honest with you, right? But on average, people are about 54% accurate at being able to spot a lie. Someone who's trained in it is about 90% effective. So we're going to actually go over some of the things that are tells so that you can actually increase your lie detection.
I remember when Bill Clinton, when the reporters were sitting there asking him about Monica Lewinsky, and I was watching on TV, and I don't remember what age I was, but I was seasoned enough to catch it. And they asked him about Monica Lewinsky, and he looked at it and he started pointing. I did not have sexual relations with that woman.
Yes.
And I was screaming at the TV, ask him what sexual relations mean, because nobody followed up with what's your definition of sexual relations.
Yes.
So he could lie, maybe thinking he buffaloed the reporters, and he did, but they didn't want to ask him. So sometimes lies can be good. Ma'am, you look fabulous today. The old Eddie Haskell approach. Miss Cleaver, oh, you look so great today.
Absolutely.
So lies aren't always bad.
Right. And that is why we tell them, right? It's because we are social creatures. And so, yes, it definitely is better to be able to glaze over the truth sometimes. You don't want to be like, yes, you absolutely look huge in those pants, right? So for social reasons, people tell. And it's really important to note that, like, we can think of people who have used lies for very, very nefarious purposes, but most of the time it's innocuous, right? So it's just important for us to be able to understand and put in context what we're looking at so that we are not duped in life, right? So what you were talking about before the break with Clinton, that's non-contracted denial. So it's like this using more language than necessary to deny, right? And so that is actually a red flag. And then some other red flags are minimal self-reference. So usually when someone is lying, what they try to do is not talk about themselves. They sort of distance themselves and dissociate from the truth. So they say, instead of this, they say that, that woman, right? Or they'll speak in the third person. It's always over there because they're distancing themselves from the lie. Another one is negative language. They're prone to speaking more negatively, like, oh, I'm so sorry, my phone battery died. I hate when that happens. I hate this stupid phone, right? So a lot of negative language in there. Another one is simple explanation. It's very difficult for the brain because we are social creatures to keep track of details in lies. So usually the explanation is quite simple that is used, but then they use very intense language. They actually over-describe things in irrelevant places, right? So they're speaking quite simply and usually in chronological order. So when someone is interviewing someone and trying to find out if they're deceptive or not, what they have found is that people who are lying want to speak from beginning to end chronologically. And so one of the tactics that lie detectors, human lie detectors will use is to have them tell the story backwards and watch them keep track of the lie and actually start to track the physical tells. The body language, the voice, the tonality, the blinks. There are a lot of things that liars will practice in the story, but they cannot practice in their body language. You cannot control your blink rate.
Like a custody fight. I absolutely did not have sex with that woman when, once again, all they had to do is say, well, Mr. So-and-so or Mrs. So-and-so, did you have sex with the other lady? No.
Yeah.
Or, yes.
Right. Qualifying language is what they call that. Believe me, to be perfectly honest, right?
Right.
So, yeah. And that's something that liars use to sort of pad their lie, sort of make it to where but it's actually a tell. It's actually, it actually goes against them. Another one is, so that's called convoluting, convoluted phrasing, right? So we're going to like make it really, and then what a lot of people will think is that liars will fidget a lot. You've heard that, right? Like they'll fidget with their hands. Actually, because liars have become more sophisticated and know what people are looking for, what will actually happen oftentimes is they'll freeze their upper body. So they'll actually get kind of stiff in the upper body. The other thing that we think of when we think about liars is that they will not make eye contact. When in fact, what they often do is make a little bit too much eye contact.
They give you
right.
the
So it's the frozen upper body, and
they don't blink.
Yeah, exactly. They're looking maybe a little too intensely just to prove that they're telling the truth. Okay. The other thing is that they do something called a duping delight. So this this is where watch the micro expressions. You know, those flashes of expressions that are inconsistent to what they're saying. A lot of times when someone is lying, they'll smile in inappropriate places. Maybe they're telling a really bad story, and we've seen this unfortunately where someone, you know, is guilty of killing maybe their child or doing something horrific. And there are little smiles that are leaking out when they're talking, and they call that duping delight, okay?
The O.J. Simpson trial.
Yes. Yeah.
Although he was proven innocent, but in the civil trial, he was proven guilty.
Yeah. So that, but also other micro expressions. So little flashes of maybe contempt, right? Contempt is basically they've dismissed you. And contempt is a little like when you see one corner of the mouth kind of go up, like, but just a flash of it, right? That, and then pursing lips, because what they're doing subconsciously is basically holding back the truth, like, you know, like just a little flash, right? So if you're watching all of those things together, those are all red flags to look for. Then there's the attitude. When someone's accused of something, for example, you will find that they're very cooperative. They're very honest. They want to talk about the story. They want to give their impressions. And if they're being accused of something that they're actually not guilty of, they will actually feel infuriated through the entire conversation. So their attitude will be one of infuriation, but also cooperation. And when they're asked about what the punishment should be, they actually choose a steep punishment, okay? So whereas when someone is, that's when they're wrongly accused. So someone who is actually guilty is actually less likely to choose a strict punishment, but more of a lenient punishment when they're asked what should happen. And you will find that they're a little bit more withdrawn, right? And they lower their voice, right? So when you're watching, whenever we're dealing with salespeople, right? And they come to the price point, and all it is $200. Right. If they get a little bit lower, we tend to go, wait a second. Why don't they have confidence in their price point, right? And we automatically think there must be some sort of deception going on there. There's also a little you know, herky-jerky, you know? And then they want to make sure that, again, that they are in strict chronological order. They're going from the beginning to the end. There's a lot of elaborative language that doesn't need to be in certain places that are completely irrelevant.
They embellish.
They embellish, exactly. Then you also want to create a baseline. So if you're talking to somebody that you actually know very well, you know their baseline behavior, right? Any alterations in their baseline behavior and the way that they speak, that is a red flag. So they'll oftentimes block you. They'll actually have a higher blink rate. There are all sorts of little tells. You should just trust yourself when someone is actually, you're picking up on something, because usually you're right. We're pretty good at lie detecting.
All right. Thank you, Debbie. Good to see you again.
You too.
There you have it. We'll see you again next week.